We all want to be like these people. We all want to stay sharper as we get older, but how can we keep our brains healthy? Joining us with tips, Dr. Rob Robinson, Clinical Director, Family Care Counseling Associates in Wilbraham. Pleasure to have you here.
Seth, great to be back.
And today we're going to debunk a lot of myths. It turns out you can teach an old person new tricks.
That's absolutely true. I mean, this whole thing about neuroplasticity is a very exciting development in the past number of years in psychology and neurophysiology. As it turns out, you know, the old thinking about brain health and brain development was that after the age of 20, there was a precipitous decline in the brain's ability to be able to regenerate, reform, and create new neural pathways and new neural cells. And then with the use of PET scan, and then after 40, it was permanently fixed and nothing could ever be done in terms of redeveloping anything about the brain. And then as a result of PET scan imaging and MRIs, we now know that the brain throughout the course of the entire lifespan is capable of being able to regenerate, reform, generate new neural pathways, and increase the synapses in the brain throughout the entire lifespan. So it's very exciting in terms of how just everyday activity, what we do, it matters in brain health. And actually, when it comes to brain health, everything matters. Everything is important.
Now, earlier you mentioned a buzzword that I think is really going to take off this year. It's neuroplasticity. And we talked about it before, but for those of us who don't know what it is, what is neuroplasticity?
Neuroplasticity is simply the brain's ability to be able to reshape, reorganize, and rewire itself over the course of time. And basically, like I said before, that this is not a stagnant process. This goes on for the entire lifetime. So people, you know, if you use your brain, you won't lose it. Everything continues to matter throughout your entire life in terms of what you do with brain health.
And you can change your perceptions too. It's kind of like taste buds. If you try something and you taste something for a couple of weeks, you can learn to like it. Similarly, you can teach your brain things and your brain will keep it.
No question at all. I mean, and look at, I mean, there's many activities that people can purposely engage in that keep their brain healthy over the course of time. For example, we were talking before we went on the air about brainy activities, you know, things that challenge your brain, like learning something new, learning to dance, learning to play an instrument, learning a new language, learning to ski later in life, learning to do something that you've never done before, not only for the interest of it, but because it has a remarkable impact on the development and the continued development of your brain and your neural pathways.
And it's also not to say if you do a crossword puzzle, you'll be better at crossword puzzles as you age. The act of doing a crossword or a Sudoku or anything is not going to just help you in that field, but in all sorts of related endeavors.
No question about it. That has application across the board if you keep your brain healthy. It's an organ that needs to be exercised. And when you do those things, you're exercising your brain.
Your second tip is interesting, I think, though. To keep your brain healthy and exercised, you also need to exercise your body. Why is that?
Exercise is as important for your brain as it is your body. You know, I may have mentioned this book before on the air at one point, but there's a book written by John Rady called Spark, which is really about how exercise affects brain physiology. Let me give you a quick example from the book. What he talks about is the Naperville, Illinois School District, where they have this new PE program there, where gym is where kids strap on heart monitors on their arm, and they have an hour in gym where they have to get their heart rate up. These kids, as a result of this PE program that's based on heart rate and exercise, scored #1 in worldwide testing in math and #4 in science worldwide. And they attribute that because these kids have this gym program which is designed to get the heart rate up that affects brain and brain physiology. So they perform better as a result of exercise. Women, for example, it's been clearly shown that who exercise regularly, you know, 30 minutes every other day, cardiovascular exercise, cut the chances of getting dementia in half during their lifetime as a result of exercise.
This is amazing stuff.
Absolutely.
And it's this neuroplasticity. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little break, come back later, because there's so much ground to cover that I don't want people's heads to get overloaded. So we will be back in a little bit to talk more ways that we can exercise our brain as we age.
Beautiful.
We're back with Dr. Rob Robinson. He's the Clinical Director of Family Care Counseling Associates in Wilbraham. We're talking about this concept that's really going to take off. It's called neuroplasticity. What is it?
Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to be able to reorganize, rewire itself, and redevelop throughout the course of our entire lives. And it wasn't until the use of PET scan images and MRIs that we were able to understand that this process can continue for a lifetime, whereas before we believed that it was just a fixed process after the age of 40.
So our brains don't crescendo at 40, they keep growing.
Absolutely
it's
not.
A living organism.
Stay active, keep it exercised, do a lot of things, not just physical exercise, but what you do with your brain.
Now, we talked about some of them earlier. All of it's going to be on our website, mymassappeal.com. We talked about diet, taking vitamin pills, but also you want to watch your blood pressure. Tell me about that.
Blood pressure is an important thing to monitor, obviously, for cardiovascular health. But as it turns out, blood pressure can contribute to dementia the longer you go into life having unchecked blood pressure. So it's important to regulate that. And actually, the other piece that helps with dementia is taking it's called watching out for the Bs, which is folic acid, vitamin B6, and vitamin B12, which really reduces homocystine, which is a neurochemical that actually can lead to dementia. So taking vitamin B12, vitamin B6, and folic acid can reduce the chances of the homocystine development.
So we're going to try to get that in our diet, try to supplement it with some pills, but we can also avoid alcohol. That's really helpful too.
Alcohol is another thing that, just you got to be careful with that. It's okay in moderation, but excessive alcohol use can clearly lead to dementia later in life if you're not careful. You have to monitor that. That affects brain health considerably.
Another tip that you have, which I think is so funny because parents always say to their kids, watch out who you hang out with. It's important for kids to say this to their parents now because who you hang out with kind of defines how your brain works.
The interesting thing, I was at a workshop last fall with a medical doctor who was working with this topic about how neuroscience informs psychology. And one of the things that was interesting is looking at PET scan images and MRIs of people who tend to isolate and withdraw from others. There's changes in the formation of the brain. People clearly can cause difficulty and challenges with their brain if they withdraw and isolate. If you stay connected, then the chances are you're going to be less depressed, but not just because you're thinking in a different way, because you feel you belong and you're connected to people, but because your brain rewires itself around the connection. So as it stands, it's very important to be able to stay socially connected and connected to other people and be close to others.
And I think there's something to be said too for a good intellectual conversation because that gets your brain moving in a way that few other things can.
No question about it. Absolutely. Good conversation is stimulating. It causes you to think, but the connection actually causes the brain to be more resilient over time.
Another thing to improve your brain's resiliency over time is to reduce stress.
Absolutely. That's another piece because stress can obviously cause disrepair to the brain. You've got to absolutely look at not only controlling the stressors that you do have control over. If you know something is stressful, it's important to take action to try to change that. But it's also, what we tell ourselves about life events that actually affect brain physiology. So learning not to die on every hill and not to see everything as the end of the world actually has implication in neurophysiology.
So as long as we keep a smile on our faces, we're a little bit better off.
That's correct.
Lastly, and this is something that's a cure-all for anything, get some sleep.
Absolutely. That's another piece that lots of people overlook. A lot of young people overlook this. I can't tell you the number of kids that I work with in my practice who stay up late into the night playing video games. They get 4 or 5 hours of sleep because they're up at 6 o'clock in the morning for school, and that changes neurochemistry. For example, serotonin is produced during delta sleep, during the sleep cycle. So if you miss delta sleep, you're not in it enough during the night, then you're not producing enough serotonin. You can actually not sleep your way into clinical depression. So it's very important to have good sleep hygiene.
Thank you so much for these tips. It's fascinating to think because that old adage, and I think almost everybody still believes it, that once you pass a certain age, your brain stops working and it can't learn new things, but it can.
Absolutely. If you don't use it, you lose it. So that's the motto to embrace.
Always a pleasure having you here.
Great to
for
see you,
these
Seth.
tips and more, just visit us online, mymassappeal.com. Great tip.